Mr. Spears, how did you become principal of Pikeville High School in 1959?
I was approached by the superintendent to discuss taking the position, and having been a graduate of Pikeville High School in 1935, I was very much interested when he offered to consider me. And after some thinking and some discussion, he recommended that I be employed as high school principal at Pikeville High School as of 1959. And the board approved his recommendation, and so I then became principal of my alma mater.
Mr. Parker Tiller, how did you become principal in 1971, which is the same year that Charles E. Spears retired his position as principal? Mr. Parker Tiller, how did you become principal in 1971 at Pikeville High School?
In 1971, the spring of that year, Mr. Spears, the superintendent at that time, called me. At that time I was working for the Williamson branch of Marshall University in Williamson, West Virginia. As a matter of fact, I followed Gene D. Davis, who had been high school principal of Pikeville for 1 year, and Mr. Spears and I had taught at Pikeville High School from 65 to 67 before returning to graduate school to receive my master's degree. And I had looked forward to someday returning to Pikeville High School, and I had the opportunity in 1971.
Mr. Spears, were there any conflicts between the recent integration with the Perry Klein students and the Pikeville High School students?
Not great. Of course, when I became principal in '59, the Perry High School students were already here. They had been integrated before I became superintendent, and I had no problems. And as far as I can remember, it was just worked beautiful. And of course, it was my at that time there was still when I became superintendent, then later, 4 years later, there was still Prairie Klein Elementary, and I approached the board about doing away with the Prairie Klein Elementary and bringing grades 1 through 6, or well, I guess it was 1 through 8. They were still there, and then that worked real well too. And we were just happy to all be one group, you see.
Okay. Mr. Charles Spears, were there any new, innovative, and different activities or policies that Pikeville High School experimented with before any other school in the area?
I can't remember any at the high school. We, as far as I can remember, we followed pretty much the plan of most high schools for the curriculum. I guess the one thing that was done that had not been here and had not been a part of most city school system, we developed an industrial arts department. I can't remember the year, but we already had home economics for the girls, but we needed some shop and general shop work and vocational work for the boys, and that was the only thing that I can remember in the way of curriculum that we added while I was here. It was out of it was different.
Mr. Spears, did you ever have any conflict with the administration during the 12 years that you were principal?
In the 12, well, see, I was really high school principal 4 years, and then 13 years following that I was superintendent. Administratively speaking, no. The board was so cooperative, and they gave me quite a bit of leeway and depended upon me and let me work with the faculty and with the students without any interference. We had 99.99% cooperation between through the administration, through the Board of Education.
Dr. Tiller, did you ever have any conflicts during the 6 years that you were principal?
No conflicts that I would think of that would be out of the ordinary in the operation of a high school. We operated a school system, or a high school here, grades 7 through 12, and we had just the general happenings in the operation of a school. There were mischievous students. We had a very active high school. They had a very large music program. At one time there were over 100 members of the band. Football team in 1972 was the first Pikeville High School football team to be involved in a playoff. The football team was 13-1 that season, all the way through the finals. They played in the last championship game on the old Stoll Field at the University of Kentucky, losing to Trigg County. But that was the first time that a Pikeville High School team had been in the football playoffs. The following year, the basketball team went to state in basketball. So it was always a very active student body, very involved on the part of the student body, and very involved from the aspect of the community and the parent support.
Mr. Charles Spears, how did you feel about the band playing for President Lyndon Johnson at the dedication of the Fish Trap Dam in 1969? This must have been a very honorable event for the PHS band.
Well, it was, and to be superintendent or an administrator in the school system had that opportunity, and also to have the opportunity to see a president right here in the mountains. And I was right there, of course, on a beautiful day like this. The sun was shining. Oh, one of the greatest occasions that I have experienced, you know, from the standpoint of president, and of course quite a bit of number of other outstanding people on the national and state level were there, and the community. Beautiful time, and we at the school were really honored that our band could be the one who welcomed, musically speaking, the President of the United States. Great time.
Dr. Park Tiller, how did you feel about this event?
I was not living in Pikeville at that time or associated with the high school. At that time in '69 I was living in Williamson, but I felt that it was a great honor for the students of Pikeville High School to represent the school, the community, as an audience to the President of the United States.
Dr. Tiller, in 1972 the Pikeville High School band marched in Louis IX's inaugural parade. What were your feelings on this special event, marking a place in history and a memory for those who were there to see it?
I had a feeling about that as the representation on the part of the band representing the school and the community. It was that same band that also made a trip to Canada and participated in the Hemisphere. The trip took over a week. 2 Trailways buses, or Greyhound buses as a matter of fact, a U-Haul truck to carry instruments, clothing, so forth, and a caravan of parents and supporters from Pikeville. It gave me a great feeling of pride and joy to be a part of that, and to know that something that I had a part of would be something that students as adults would remember for the rest of their lives.
Mr. Spears, How did the school feel, or rather, what was the reaction to the T.W. Oliver Dam being destroyed by fire in 1969?
The bottom dropped. Having, a facility like that, and you hardly found another in the state that was as good and equal to it. So we were quite depressed for some time. And of course, as I stand here and look at the Blue Goose there, the board quickly, at my recommendation, provided a limited facility to carry on basketball practice, but it was never able to have. We were never able to have any games there. We had to use college gym facilities, you see, for basketball games until we could get new facilities that were adequate. But it was a real big loss. Physical education was so limited, as well as basketball participation, varsity games. See, so we were handicapped quite heavily.
Dr. Tiller, were you enthusiastic about the construction of the W.C. Hamley Athletic Complex?
Yes, as a matter of fact, when we completed our football season in the fall of 1971, we were looking forward to the completion of the complex there bordering the high school. The old football field was an open space with bleachers, not necessarily organized for any particular event, but to serve as a multi-purpose, the county fair, football, baseball. As a matter of fact, the Saturday after the last day, the last game in 1971, the Key Club of Pikeville High School, along with a couple of the janitors, disassembled the bleachers and stacked them away so that they could be used when the new facility was completed. The following year, we played all of our home football games either at the Johns Creek field or at the Mullins football field. And we were on the road on all of our games. That happened to be a 13-game winning season for us. And here was a football team with 23 football players, a first-year coach. The entire coaching staff was in their first year, and they were the runners-up in the state. That football team, traveling to all the football games, had the highest rushing record of any team in the state, and as a matter of fact, has the record that still stands of having the highest rushing record of any football team in the state history.
That football coach's name was, his first 4 years of varsity coaching, his name was?
Hillard Howard. Bill Alara was in his first year as a full-time assistant.
Mr. Charles Spears. Dr. Tiller, in 1969 and 1970, the Pikeville High School was accredited by the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. What was your feeling on that?
I felt like that it represented the efforts of a dedicated faculty and administration to provide for the students and the community of Pikeville the best possible education that a school system could provide. Mr. Spears was superintendent at that time and recognized the fact that being a member of the Southern Association symbolized to the greater community and the community outside the Pikeville area that the school board, the superintendent, administration, and faculty was dedicated to an effort to provide this educational program. They worked hard. They worked, and their efforts were recognized when the Southern Association designated the Pikeville Independent Schools, high school and elementary, as a member of the Southern Association, which they still maintain.
Mr. Spears, do you feel that during the years you were principal, the school was successful academically?
Very much so. At that time, through that 4-year period that I was principal, we participated annually in a state testing program. And we annually we scored in the upper 25 percentile. Our scores were there were many schools throughout the state were taking the same test. So, being mountain folk, having limited transportation in and out, we could say to ourselves, as say to the State Department of Education, we were doing all right academically. We were really emphasizing those things that were basic to the education of young high school people.
Were there any noticeable changes during the time you were principal?
I can't remember any great changes. I had been, as I referred to previously, I graduated here in '35 when Mr. T.W. Oliver was superintendent principal. He was two offices in one, and I can remember what he did and how he conducted school programs, and I'm sure I modeled quite a bit after him, and we continued pretty much the same type of program that I'd enjoyed and that had proved quite adequate for me when I became a college student later on and did graduate studies.
Dr. Tiller, did you notice any progressive changes in the school's operations during your term as principal?
One of the major things that I think that took place in our school, I was high school principal for 5 years. We began the construction on the new high school. I still refer to it as the new high school. However, there are students there who probably at the time that we opened it were not born. But Mr. Spears, along with the Board of Education, recognized the need for new facilities, and they investigated the possibility of building in phases on this very lot that we're on. The State Department discouraged that because they felt that we needed to have a greater amount of outdoor space. We were able to purchase, the board and Mr. Spears were able to purchase the 4.5 acres where the present high school is located. Received an agreement from the city that the outdoor space would be considered as the city park, the Hambly Athletic Complex, and that agreement was reached for the benefit of all who come on. I think that that was probably one of the most important things that took place during my service as a high school principal. It was supported through a bond issue passed in the spring of 1973 by the residents of Pikeville, which demonstrates the support that the citizens of this community have had for education throughout.
May I add to that, one of the unique things that stands out in my mind relative to the bond issue and getting the money to build the now Pikeville High School where it is. Then it was new to us. I never forget one day getting a letter through the mail, a check for $2.5 million. To me, I mean, that was, more than the budget of the total school system any year up to that time that I had.
We're now in the principal's office at the new Pikeville High School, and we're still speaking to Mr. Charles E. Spears and Dr. Parker Tiller. Mr. Tiller, do you feel that during the years you were principal, the school was successful academically?
Yes, I'm definite in that. I have had an opportunity to see the students that we had in the period of time from 71 to 76. They are grown, children of their own. They have successful careers, and I feel that the program that we provided was an integral part of their success into adulthood.
Were there any noticeable changes during the time you were principal?
The Pikeville cut-through was started in the time that I was high school principal. As a matter of fact, our high school band in 1974, I think that it was probably in March, they rode in a bus one afternoon to the area of Cole Hollow near the present Hamley Boulevard, Klein Street. It was raining, but their purpose in being there was to play for the groundbreaking ceremony. The rain prohibited any major outdoor ceremony. They did play some songs while they were on the bus, and the groundbreaking was symbolized by a dynamite explosion. I think that was probably one of the most significant things that happened relative to the development of the town, changes beginning to take place. I probably was part of the others who somewhat skeptical that there would be such a thing as the cut-through, and it's a pleasure now to see the results of that. But I do have that recollection of that afternoon of the band leaving to play for the groundbreaking ceremony.
Mr. Spears, what was your greatest achievement, do you feel, that you had during your term as principal?
Well, it's really been mentioned by Mr. Tiller as a memory of his. When we were readmitted to the Southern Association of Colleges and Secondary Schools, which indicated our academic program was highly approved by an educational group from out of the section. And one reason it is a memorable thing, quite a good memory for me. The first year I was principal, we were dropped from that Southern Association. We didn't mention that when we were discussing it before, because what it used to be called the Academy was disbanded suddenly without prior notice, and their students were set down and it overcrowded our junior high. Some classrooms had 50, and when we reported that to Southern Association, they just said, "You're out." But later on, we were able to overcome that, and even if in the old facilities, be readmitted. Then, of course, another high point in my administration was the building and going into the new elementary school, and then later on building the new high school where we're now present, where the only official thing I ever did in this building, which was built during my administration, and I claim it sort of, the only official act on my part in this building was I was the commencement speaker to the graduating class of 1976, my last year.
Dr. Tiller, what do you feel was your greatest achievement?
I don't know if I could really identify any one particular thing as the greatest achievement. As high school principal, we were able to bring about some innovative curriculum programs. We were able to have to initiate the 22 credit requirement for high school graduation. I came in as a high school principal in 1971 to a schedule that was designated as a flexible schedule. Pikeville High School, some years before, had traditionally had study halls, a 6-period day with study halls. A previous principal had introduced the flexible scheduling to the Pikeville school system. However, when I became high school principal, we found that there were students with the flexible schedule who were able to get quite a number of classes before their senior year, and they had additional time that they could take college classes, which we encouraged. We had a number of students who, after high school graduation, had almost the equivalent of freshman ranking over with at the college level by their being able to take college classes. So we were always looking to the possibility of helping do something with the curriculum that would be beneficial to students.
And this is directed to both of you. Did the two of you work well together when making decisions about school affairs during the time that Mr. Spears was superintendent and Dr. Tiller, you were principal?
From my perspective, I thought we worked well together. I had served as a classroom teacher in the Pikeville High School for 2 years prior to returning to graduate school and getting a master's degree teaching in a community college setting. Mr. Spears approached me a year before I came back as high school principal. He and I talked at length about that possibility. I remained in the community college setting for another year, and my wife and I discussed that considerably during that time of an opportunity of coming back to Pikeville. We decided that if the opportunity came along again, that we would take advantage of it. We were very fortunate. The following year, Mr. Spears called me again, and there was no hesitation about moving back to Pikeville and becoming Pikeville High School principal. We worked together for 5 years, and our association, I think, was a very good relationship. Mr. Spears had the online experience being a classroom teacher, a principal, a supervisor, and a superintendent. I was a person who was totally inexperienced as an administrator, and Mr. Spears gave me the help and guidance that I needed. I'm thankful to him today for that, and I think for what I have accomplished as an administrator, I owe it primarily to Mr. Spears.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Tiller, and I concur with what he's just summarized. Our relationship was very good, and we were just happy that we could have the opportunity to work in this school system together. And his cooperation was all that superintendent would ask for. We had a good time together working, and we had to work, and we worked hard, to tell you.
Mr. Spears, why did you decide to retire in 1976?
Oh, I really made the decision a year before. I had a life of hard work from boyhood through all the time that 19 and through up until 1976 when I retired. But 1 year prior to my retirement, I made a decision during the summer. Well, I don't know, at the end of the previous year of school, and I told the Board of Education then, I said, now I will retire at the end of this year. Please think about what you'd like to do about my successor. And they thought about it, and they decided for the first time during my time here, we had an assistant superintendent. Mr. John Waddell was hired as my assistant. in order that he could get familiar with the system during the 1 year that I had remaining. And that happened, and then he succeeded me. But my choice was that I decided that I wanted to have a little freedom, have less responsibility, which had begun early in my life, and that by being careful, my finances, retirement income would be adequate. And so I just decided to be free a while, and I've been free now for 16 years of a lot of responsibility. I'm inclined to be a little lazy, I guess. Made me retire early. I had worked pretty hard. I agree with you. I really had a lot of hard work. Go ahead.
Dr. Taylor, when did you leave the principal office, and what was your role at Pikeville High School afterwards?
In 1976, I became the instructional supervisor and federal programs director for the Pikeville Independent Schools. Served for 1 year and then returned to graduate school to do my residence on my doctorate. Then returned in 1978 to the same position with Pikeville City Schools, where I remained until 1989, when I assumed the present position that I hold as superintendent in Jenkins Independent System.
This question is directed to both of you. What was the most memorable experience that you shared together while you were working here at PHS?
For me, I don't remember anything right. I'm sure there must have been, but my memory's not that good anymore. I'm getting a little up in years. But I just remember we had pleasant working relationships throughout the time that his work and mine overlapped. One particular incident right now I don't recall any. It's more outstanding than just the general tone was good.
I have the same type of feeling as Mr. Spears, that there's not one incident that sticks out above all of the others. I could sit for the entire afternoon and just relate different instances of student activities that we had at Pikeville High School in the period of time that I was associated there, from beginning in 1965 as a classroom teacher to the period of time as high school principal or as supervisor, and seeing the accomplishments of our students. I have the pleasure now of seeing students in their professions, students that I've had, students who have gone on to raise families of their own and have their own children involved in the activities of Pikeville High School. The sports teams, the academic teams. In the days as high school principal, we did not have an academic team as such. However, we did have students who would go to Eastern, to UK, to Clinch Valley College and participate in standardized tests in science and math, and our students consistently were top achievers. Our students went on to college, from our local colleges, community colleges, to state colleges and northeastern colleges that traditionally have the reputation as the best in the country, and our students have succeeded. Their success has been the thing that I recognize as my best moments in seeing their success.
The site of the old Pikeville High School is now only a restaurant parking lot. But to those that were a part of the old Pikeville High School, It is a walk down memory lane. Thank you, Mr. Spears and Dr. Tiller.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.